Being buried alive does not sound like silence. It sounds like the whole world grinding its teeth a foot above your face. And then it sounds like your own breath coming back at you off the stone, fast and close and getting closer. Mercy Calloway came to in the dark with a wagon wheel across her chest and the taste of grit and copper in her mouth, and the dim, drowning understanding that the roar she was remembering had not been a dream. The mountain had come down. It had come down on the switchback at dusk, all of it at once, half a ridge of loose gray rock sliding off the high face in a sound like the end of the world. And it had taken the wagons and the oxen and the drivers and every soul she had traveled 900 miles beside, and it had left her here, in a pocket of broken timber and stone, with one arm she could not feel and one hand she could, and that one hand was still moving. She did not know yet that she was the only thing left breathing under a quarter-mile of fallen mountain. She only knew that some animal part of her, older than thought, had already decided that she was going to keep doing it. A quarter-mile up the slope in a cabin built into the lee of a granite shoulder, a man named Eli Brand felt the mountain move through the soles of his boots before he heard it. He was on his feet before the roar reached the cabin, the long gun already in his hand out of pure habit, and he stood in his open door and watched the far switchback below the Timberline disappear into a boiling gray cloud of rock dust 300 feet high. And he knew, the way a man knows the weather and the way a man knows grief, exactly what had been on that road and exactly what was under that dust now. A wagon train. He had cut their sign 2 days back on the freight grade and thought, with the old bitterness, more fools coming up to die in this country. He had not gone down to warn them off. He had told himself it was none of his business, and that thought turned over in his chest now, like a stone of its own. Then his dog began to howl, not bark, howl. A long, broken note pointed straight down the slope at the ruin, the sound a dog makes for the dead and the dying both. Boone was a big, rangy brindle hound, slab-headed and slow to noise, and Eli had not heard him make that sound since the winter Ruth died. He was not looking at the dust. He was looking at one particular place at the foot of it, low at the broken edge, and he would not stop. And Eli Brand, who had wanted nothing on this earth for 11 years but to be left alone with his quiet, looked where his dog was looking and felt something he had buried a long time ago turn over and open one eye. He went down the slope. He did not decide to. His legs were already moving. Eli Brand was 38 and built the way the high country builds the men it lets stay. Long through the arms, deep in the chest, nothing wasted. A scar ran from the corner of his left eye down into an iron-gray beard, the gift of a saber at a railhead in Tennessee, in a war he had ridden into as a scout at 19, and ridden out of with most of the warm parts of himself left behind, in the mud. Down in the mining camp they called him the Ghost of the High Pass, and he had let every name they hung on him stand for 11 years, because a name was a wall, and a wall kept people on their own side of it, and the far side of his wall was the only place he had ever again been able to breathe. He reached the edge of the slide as the light was failing, and the dust was settling into a fine gray snow over the splintered wagon tongues, and the dead oxen, and the tumbled blocks of stone the size of root cellars. And he made himself look at it the way he had learned to look at terrible things, flat and whole, without flinching. 9 people. 4 wagons by their wreckage. Nobody walked away from this. He had seen what a mountain did to soft things, and there was nothing soft left alive under all that gray, and he knew it the way he knew his own hands. And then Boone went straight to a place at the low edge of the field, to a dark gap between a slab of granite and a half-crushed wagon box, and put his nose down into it and whined, high and urgent, and scratched at the stone with both forepaws, and would not be called off. Eli got down on his knees in the rubble and put his face to the gap and listened. For a long moment there was nothing but the tick of settling stone and the wind starting up off the high passes with the cold coming down behind it. He was about to pull back. He was about to tell the dog there was nothing, the way you tell a dog a thing to make yourself believe it. And then, from down in the dark under the mountain, so faint he felt it in his teeth, before he heard it in his ears, there came a sound, a human sound, a woman's voice, cracked down to almost nothing, saying a word over and over. And the word she was saying, down there in the grave the mountain had made for her, was not help, and was not God, and was not any name. The word she was saying was no. Eli Brand took off his coat. What followed was 3 hours of the hardest work he had done in 11 years, in the failing light and then in the dark by feel, on his knees, with his bare hands and a broken wagon bar for a lever, talking the whole time in a low, steady voice he had not used on another soul in longer than he could remember. "I'm coming," he said into the gap, his palms going raw and then bloody on the grit. "You keep saying that word. You keep saying no, you understand? You don't get to say anything else till I've got you." And down in the dark, the cracked voice kept saying it, weaker and weaker. And every time it nearly stopped, he said something to start it again. And the cold came down off the high country the way it does, patient, in no hurry at all, because the cold has never once in its life needed to hurry. He reached her hand first. It came up out of the dark and closed around 2 of his fingers with a strength that had no right to be left in a body that broken, and held on, and did not let go. And something turned over in Eli Brand's chest in that moment that he would never say aloud. The precise instant a stranger under a mountain stopped being a tragedy he had stumbled onto, and became, instead, the one thing in the world he was not going to let the mountain have. He got the last stone clear near midnight and drew her up out of the broken rock the way you draw a splinter from deep in the flesh, slow and straight. And the moon was up by then, over the white peaks, and in that hard silver light, he got his first true look at the only one of them who had lived. She was young, younger than he wanted her to be. Her face was a mask of gray dust, gone to mud where the blood had run. There was a long cut above her brow and a wrongness to the set of her left arm, and her eyes, when they found his face hanging over her, were the gray-green of creek ice, and they were not afraid. He had braced for the wild terror of a hurt thing waking to a stranger's hands. What he got instead was a long, level, measuring look that took his measure, and the measure of the whole ruined world at once. And then her cracked lips moved, and the first word she ever gave him wasn't thank you. "Anyone else," she whispered. It was not quite a question. She already knew. "No," Eli said. It was the truest and the hardest thing he had ever had to hand to another living soul. And he did not soften it because he had looked at her and seen that softening it would be an insult. "Just you." Something went across her face then, some great wave of a grief, too big for the body to hold all at once, and she shut her creek ice eyes against it, and she did not weep, and she did not cry out, and Eli Brand understood, kneeling there in the moonlight with her broken weight in his arms, that he had pulled out of the mountain a person built the same hard way he was, a person who had learned somewhere, young, to swallow the thing that would break her and keep it down where it could not be used against her. And he carried her up the slope toward the one warm room he owned, with that understanding settling into him like a coal taking light. Inside, he laid her down by the fire and did the things that had to be done in the order they had to be done. He thought about the arm first. It was broken clean below the elbow, a single break, which was a mercy. And he set it the way the army had taught him to set bones, where there was no doctor for 100 miles, fast and hard, with a flat warning a half-second before so she could ready herself. She made one sound when he pulled it true, one low animal sound bitten off at the root, and then breathed through her teeth in long sawing pulls while he splinted it to a length of pine. And she watched the whole time, never looking away, as if she meant to learn it. He worked her ruined boots off feet gone bloodless and cold and wrapped them, and built the fire higher than he had let it burn in years, and watched the gray go out of her face by slow inches, hour by hour, the only way warmth ever comes back into a body the cold has gotten into, until somewhere in the deep middle of that long night, a little color rose under the dust like a coal taking light. She did not sleep so much as fall, all at once, the way the body falls when it has decided the hands working over it mean it no harm. I want to stop on this picture for just a moment. A man on his knees by a fire, feeding warmth back into a body the mountain tried to keep, because it is the whole reason this channel exists. If you have ever watched the world decide a person was finished, watched it close the stone over somebody and turn its back and tell itself the account was settled, and quietly, fiercely needed to see that person live long enough to prove it wrong, then you already belong here. Take a moment and follow Timberline hearts, because the slow, stubborn, unbought kind of love story I tell, the kind where two people the cold should have killed find in each other a reason to want the spring, is the only kind I am interested in, and there is a great deal more of this one still to come. He did not sleep at all. He sat across the fire with the long gun over his knees and watched a stranger breathe in the only place on earth he had managed to be left alone, while below them in the dark, the mountain sat quiet over the 9 it had taken. When she woke, the first thing Mercy Calloway did was lie perfectly still and take an accounting, because waking up alive was not a thing she had planned for, and she had learned a long time ago that the wrong move in the wrong room could cost a woman more than the cold ever would. There was a fire, and the smell of wood smoke and tallow and wet dog, and under it the green smell of moss in the walls. There was a low roof of split logs close overhead, and a deep grinding ache in her left arm splinted straight against the pine. And there was a man the size of the doorway, sitting against the far wall with a gun across his knees and his eyes on her, eyes a weathered creek-bottom blue, with a pale scar running down out of one of them into an iron-gray beard. She did not scream. She had been past screaming for a long time. "Where?" she said in a rasp she did not recognize as her own. "My cabin." He did not move. "High pass. North shoulder. Above the camp." The camp. The word went into her like cold water, and her whole body went careful, because the camp was where they had all been headed. The camp was Doss and the land office, and the long bad feeling that had ridden the whole train the last 3 days. And if this man was a camp man, then she had crawled up out of one grave straight into the open mouth of another. She closed her face the way he had closed his. "How long?" she said. 2 days. You came and went." "Mostly went." "My." She stopped. The accounting reached the place where the others should have been, and found the stone over it, and she made herself go on, because not saying a thing had never once made it less true. "There were 9 of us, and the drivers." "I know," Eli said low. "I'm sorry." And that was all he said. He didn't tell her it was God's will, or that they were in a better place, or any of the soft, useless things people say to step around the edge of another person's grief so they need not stand in it. He said, "I'm sorry," flat and true, and then let the silence be what it was. And Mercy Calloway found, to her dull surprise, that the not saying was the first thing anyone had ever done for her grief that did not make it worse. She looked at her splinted arm and her bound feet and understood without being told exactly what the setting of that bone and the warming of that body had cost a man in a long night's labor. And she saw his hands then, both palms wrapped in the same clean wool as her feet, scabbed and raw where the stone had taken the skin off. A part of her recoiled on instinct, because a debt was a leash, and she had spent her whole life slipping leashes, and she had learned young and hard what it meant to owe a man who kept accounts. People did not dig strangers out of mountains for nothing. Every kindness was the front half of a price. "I can't pay you for any of this," she said. It came out flat and hard, a fact laid on the floor between them like a dropped knife, and she watched his face for the thing she expected, the slow, calculating look, the particular ugliness that comes into certain men's faces when a woman with nothing tells them she has nothing. She braced for it the way you brace for a blow you have already felt once. It did not come. Eli Brand looked at her a long moment and then looked at the fire and said, in a voice like two stones grinding slow against each other, "Didn't pull you out to get paid for it." He got up, bigger standing, and ladled a thin broth gone rich with the morning's meat into a wooden bowl and set it on the floor within reach of her good hand and not 1 inch closer, so she would not have to suffer him holding it to her mouth, so she could take it or leave it as a free thing. Then he went back to his wall and took up a strip of leather and a knife and began to work it soft, and he did not watch her eat. She looked at the broth a long time. Then she drank it, because she was not a fool, and because some stubborn animal part of her had decided down under the mountain that she would live out of pure spite, and a body cannot spite the world on an empty stomach. It was hot and good, and it hurt going down. He did not watch her drink it, the small mercy of not being looked at while she was weak. And she filed it away with a suspicion that bordered on dread, because men who fed you wanted something, and men who looked away while you ate it wanted something worse, or wanted nothing, and she did not have a drawer in her whole life she could put a man who wanted nothing into. The storm came down out of the high passes on the third night, and it shut the country like a slammed door. And it didn't let up for 9 days. 9 days is a long stretch to spend in one room with a stranger you do not trust, and they spent it the way two wary animals share a den, carving the small space into territories and learning each other's edges without ever once admitting that was what they were doing. She kept to the pallet while the arm knit. He kept to his work, the endless husbandry of a snowbound cabin, mending traps, oiling iron, splitting the woodpile down and stacking it back, rendering fat, scraping a marten hide pegged to the wall. Every motion done with the unhurried economy of a man who had done each 10,000 times alone and had stopped, long ago, needing anyone to see him do them. He did not ask her how the mountain had come down. She noticed that, the way you notice a held breath in a quiet room. Any other man would have asked it inside the first hour, wanted the whole story as the price of the broth, the drama of it to stand inside as her rescuer. Eli Brand asked her nothing. He moved through every hour as though her past were a country with a fence around it, and he had no business on the far side. And slowly, against every instinct she owned, the not asking did what 1,000 gentle questions never could. It made a small room inside her where the truth could sit a while without being demanded of it. On the second morning of the storm, she gave him her name, just the front of it. "Mercy," she said out of nowhere into the sound of his knife on the hide. "My name's Mercy." "Mercy," he said, trying the shape of it like the weight of a tool that was not his, and went back to the hide. That was how it went, Day after snowbound day, care delivered through the small machinery of the hours, the only language either of them had ever learned to trust. He worked out that she could not sleep with her back to the door, and without a word, turned her pallet so the door was always in her sight. She worked out that he flinched, barely, the first time she reached past him for the salt, a flinch he plainly hated in himself, and after that she set her hands before she moved them near him, reaching by you, quiet every time, until the flinch wore down to nothing. She caught him leaving more food out than the two of them could eat, and only understood why the day she found her own hand palming a crust into a fold of the blanket against a hunger that was not coming back anymore, and understood that he had seen it coming, the way only a man who had once done it himself could, and had quietly arranged that it would cost her no shame. She could not lie idle 9 days, so she took up what her hands could do. She was an engraver's daughter and an engraver herself, raised over a print shop in St. Joseph, trained from a girl to cut maps and the fine lettering on land patents into copper with a steel burin. Towncraft not worth a tin nickel on a mountain, and the knowing of that was its own grief. But a hand that can lay a clean line in copper can lay one in anything. And she mended the tear in his spare shirt, and the burst seam of a meal sack with stitches so small, and even he turned the work over twice in the firelight. "You've got a trade in those hands," he said. "I had one," she said, and did not say what had become of it, and he did not ask. She first saw the whistle on the 4th day. It hung on a peg by the hearth where another man might have hung a crucifix, a small whistle carved from pale bone, worn amber with handling, on a plaited rawhide cord, gone dark with the oil of a hand, and beside it a little flat pouch of oiled cloth, tied shut. She watched him take it down once when he thought she slept, and only hold it and run his thumb along it the way you gentle a frightened thing, and hang it back. On the 6th day she asked. "It was my sister's, Ruth's," he said at last, the firelight on the scar. "She carved it as a girl, off a deer we took, and used to blow it from the porch at dusk to call me in off the far field. 3 notes, wasn't another soul it could have been for." "And where's Ruth now?" Mercy said, careful. "Gone," he said, and the way he set the trap spring down told her the fence around that was the highest one in the cabin, and she did not climb it, and he glanced at her once, surprised, the way a man looks at someone who has just declined to take a thing he had braced to have taken. On the 7th night the fire burned low and Mercy woke shivering, and she heard him get up and feed it quietly back to life, and then she felt the weight of his own coat settle over her, heavy, smelling of wood smoke and cold iron and the clean warmth of him, and she lay very still with her heart going hard, and did not say, "Thank you," because thank you was a coin, and this was not a transaction, and she heard him sit back down without his coat in the cold he had just given away, and felt the last of some old, hard-frozen thing inside her begin against her will to give. On the 8th night the wind cracked a length of clay loose from over the door, and they sealed it together in the dark, his hands and hers, passing the wet moss back and forth. And when it was done, they stood close in the dim with the snow melting in their hair, both breathing hard, near enough that she could feel the heat coming off his chest. And for one long beat, neither of them stepped back, and the few inches between his arm and hers were the loudest silence she had ever stood inside, until Boone whined from the hearth and broke it. On the 9th day the wind died. The silence after it was so total that they both came awake at once, in the dark, to the sudden absence of the thing that had filled the whole world for over a week, and they lay and listened to the nothing. And Mercy Calloway found that the loudest thing in that silence was how badly she did not want the storm to be over. because the end of the storm was the end of the only safe room she had ever stood inside, and she did not yet have a word for what that meant. And she was afraid of the word. In the morning, the world was white and blinding and brutally, gorgeously clear. The mountain washed clean and shining like the first morning of anything. And Eli Brand stood in his open door looking down the long, bright slope at the gray wound in it. And he said without turning, the longest thing he had said to her in 9 days. "A whole ridge doesn't come off a dry mountain at dusk," he said. It was not a question. I've trapped that face 11 years. Its slides come in spring with the melt in behind the stone, slow, loud enough to run from. This came in dry cold, off the top, all at once, no warning. He turned then, and the weathered blue eyes were not closed off anymore. A mountain comes down like that when something helps it. Powder, set deep in the right seam, by a man who knows stone. Somebody brought that ridge down on purpose. The only question I've got is whether they knew your train was under it when they lit it, or whether your train was the whole reason they did. His voice was very level. So, I'll ask you the one thing I haven't. Who wanted that wagon train gone? And Mercy Calloway, standing in the one safe room in the world on the morning it stopped being safe, looked at the man who had not asked her a single thing in 9 days and decided to open the fence. If you've made it this far into Mercy's story, hit subscribe, because what happens next is the part I've been waiting to tell you. There was a man riding with us out of the camp's land office, she said. Asahel Doss. The fire popped. Boone lifted his head. My brother sent for me last spring, Mercy said. Caleb. He'd come west 2 years back and filed on a quarter section in the bottomland below the pass. The only good ground in 50 miles of rock. Water on it. A stand of timber. He wrote me to come keep his house. Said the land was ours, free and clear and patented in his own name. And sent the patent papers folded in the letter so I'd believe him. Her voice did not shake. Caleb died in October. A fever, they wrote me. By the time the letter caught me, I was most of the way here. So I came on, a quarter section waiting with my dead brother's name on it, and mine the only name left to inherit. And 1,000 miles behind me, and nothing to go back to. And Doss, Eli said, low. Asahel Doss is the land agent for the whole district, Mercy said. What he truly does, what everybody in that camp knows and nobody will say, is wait. He waits for a man to file on good ground and die of it. The fever, the cold, a fall. This country kills filers by the dozen. And before the family back east has even had the letter, Doss has filed a forged transfer, and the patent that was free and clear is suddenly his, all legal, all on paper, with the only man who could have argued it dead in the ground. Her chin came up. Doss has wanted Caleb's land 2 years, but Caleb patented it clean and mailed the original papers to me before he died, and a forged transfer doesn't hold against an original patent and a living blood heir holding the real papers. I was the papers and the heir both, Mercy said, riding straight into his camp to claim ground he'd already sold twice over for cash. The morning we started up the pass, Doss rode part way with us, friendly as you please, asking did I have Caleb's papers safe, asking just where I carried them. Then he turned back before the switchback. Business at the land office, he said. An hour later, half the mountain came down on us in dry cold at dusk. 9 of us, every soul who'd seen him ride out with us that morning, every witness who could have said he knew which switchback we'd be on and when. Buried clean. A tragedy. The kind of thing this hard country does. She looked at him, steady. He never laid a hand on us. He just needed the mountain to do it. And he knows that mountain. And now there's nobody left to say different. And the one thing standing between Asahel Doss and the cleanest day's work he ever did is a girl he's certain is under the stone with the rest. Eli Brand listened to all of it without moving, and when she was done he was quiet so long she thought, here it is. Here's where he decides that Asahel Doss is a bad enemy to make over a woman he dug out of a hole 9 days ago, and shows me the bottom of him like all the rest. Instead, he took the long gun down and checked it. No drama in it, only the plain competence of a man taking the measure of a chore that has to be done. Then he'll come up here, once he hears even a whisper that somebody walked out of that slide. Men who do murder by mountain still come to count the bodies. To be sure, the count is 9. He set the gun back by the door, loaded, ready. And when he comes, he's gonna find you're not under the mountain anymore. You're in a house with a door, and the door's got somebody behind it now. It was the most that anyone had ever offered Mercy Calloway, and it was offered the way he offered everything. Sideways, in the flat language of logistics, a door and a gun and a man to stand behind both. And she understood it for exactly what it was, and had to turn and face the fire, so he would not see what it did to her. She had not wept under the mountain, and she had not wept when she woke alive, and she was not going to start now over a kindness. Except that she did. 2 silent tracks down a face that had forgotten how, while the bone whistle hung on its peg and the man behind her had the grace again to pretend he saw none of it. They did not come that week, nor the next. The snow lay too deep in the pass, and Eli knew it. He went down to the slide once, alone on the snowshoes, and came back up gray with rock dust, a torn carpet bag over his shoulder. Mercy's hands shook as she opened it. The oilcloth packet she had sewn into the lining had burst, the patent papers inside reduced to a gray pulp. The snowmelt and stone had unmade past any reading. She sat looking at the ruin of the one thing that had made her dangerous to Asahel Doss, and understood that without it, she was exactly what he needed her to be. A girl with a story and no paper, easy to call a liar, easy to make disappear a second time. It's gone, she said. There's nothing now to say the land was ever Caleb's. And Eli looked at the pulp and then at her face and said the thing that told her what kind of man had dug her out. Paper burns and pulps and gets lost. You're still here saying it. The better witness made it up the mountain. We'll worry about the law's paper if we live to need it. First we live. So he taught her the cabin, where the second cache of powder was behind a loose stone in the chimney, where the snowshoes hung, how the heavy bar dropped across the door, and how to drop it fast. He did not say, in case I'm not here. He did not have to. He was teaching her to survive him, the way the country had once taught him to survive it. And they both knew it, and neither said it aloud. And he taught her the rifle. The first morning she held the long gun like the foreign thing it was, and he stood behind her in the snow and showed her the breathing of it, the slow squeeze, the way you do not fight the kick but let it come. Her first shot went a yard wide of the marten hide on a far pine, and by the third morning she could put a ball through it 3 times running, and the day she did, he looked at the tight little group of holes and then at her and said, "Your hands don't shake," not as a question, and she said, "Not anymore." And something passed between them that was not about marksmanship at all. And in the teaching, something went on thawing that the fire could never have reached. She learned the high country from his door. He had private names for all of it, the names a man gives a world he has lived in alone 11 years and never expected to say aloud. The widow pine, for a lightning-split snag that had outlived everything around it. The place he called with the closest thing to humor she had yet seen in him. The bank, because a marten he had been after 3 years denned there, and he had never once made a withdrawal. She laughed at that, a startled, cracked sound she had not made in longer than she could remember, and she caught him looking at her the way a man looks at the first warm day, after a winter he was not sure he would live through, and she did not know what to do with it. So she did nothing, and the doing nothing sat warm and frightening in her chest the rest of the day. They fell into the shape of a life without ever deciding to. She woke before him and built the fire up. He came in from the trapline at dusk and found it burning, and her at her stitching, and something in his face eased every time, as though he had spent the whole cold day half expecting to come home and find her gone. The silences between them stopped being walls and started being a room the two of them lived in. And one evening she caught herself humming low under her breath while she worked, a thing she had not done in years, and stopped, startled, and looked up to find him watching her with a half-mended trap forgotten in his hands, and neither looked away as fast as they should have. One night, the wind worrying at the chinking, she asked him the question she had been carrying since the first morning. "Why didn't you ask," she said, "how the mountain came down? You waited 9 days. Any other man would have made me tell it the first hour, just to feel like the hero of the thing." Eli was a long time answering. He was working a strip of leather soft between his hands, and the firelight moved on the scar. "When I was a younger man," he said at last, "I told a story about myself to anybody who'd hold still for it. How I came to be up here. How I came to look like this." He touched the scar without seeming to know he did it. "And every time I told it, I was shaping it to get a certain look on a person's face, selling it. And one winter up here I worked out I'd told it so many times I didn't rightly know anymore which parts were true and which I'd bent." He set the leather down. "A person's story isn't a coin to spend on what other folks think of them. It's about the only thing that stays all the way theirs. Looked to me like you'd had enough spent of yours already. I wasn't going to be one more man with his hand out." The fire cracked. Outside, an owl asked its one question of the dark. "Tell me about Ruth," Mercy said softly. "You don't have to sell it to me, but I'd like to be told it, by you, as a true thing." And Eli Brand, who had not told the true version to a living soul in 11 years, told her about the farm back in Ohio, and Ruth, who had been the bright one, the brave one, with a laugh you could hear across a county. How, when the war took him east in 61, Ruth wrote him every week without fail. The only thread that kept him stitched to the idea that somewhere there was a world that was not mud and powder smoke. How he had come home in 65, hollowed out and strange, and it was Ruth, only Ruth, who had not flinched from the thing he had become. "And then it was her that needed me," he said, and his voice went down to almost nothing. "Took a fever the next winter, the kind that goes to the lungs. I sat with her the whole slow dying of it, and at the end, she made me promise I'd go find the quiet she always said would fix me, somewhere clean and high, and let the country put me back together." He looked into the fire. "So I came up here and kept it to the letter, and didn't let another soul all the way in for 11 years. And it took me about 10 of those years to see I'd kept it exactly backwards. She didn't send me up here to be alone. She sent me up here to mend so I could go back down and live. I just heard the part I wanted to hear, because alone was easier than mending, and then alone got to be the only thing I knew how to do." Then he did a thing she did not expect. He took down the little flat pouch of oiled cloth and worked it open with his thumb, and drew out a square of paper folded so many times it had gone soft as cloth at the creases. She wrote it the last week, when she still had a steady hand. Told me not to read it till I was settled somewhere. He unfolded it slow by the fire, and Mercy saw the blood go out of his face the way it does when a man is about to do a thing he hasn't let himself do in years. I never read it out loud. Not to anybody. And then, because what was all the way his he would now choose to make partly hers, he read it to her. It was not long. A dying young woman's letter, the hand still neat with effort, full of small things, instructions about the garden, a joke about their mother's bread, the name of the dog they'd had as children. She wrote that she was not afraid, which may have been a lie, and that she was proud of him, which was not. And then, at the end, she wrote the lines that Eli's grinding voice broke clean through on, the only time Mercy ever heard it break all the way. Go find your quiet, big brother, but don't you dare make a home out of it. Quiet's a place to heal, not a place to live. When you're mended, and you will mend, you are always the strongest of us. You carry this old whistle back down off whatever mountain you've climbed, and you find some good soul to call in out of the dark with it, the way I used to call you in off the field. 3 notes, Eli. Low, high, low. It means the light's going and you've worked enough and it's time to come home. Don't you spend the rest of your life being the one nobody's left to call. Promise me you'll let somebody learn the notes. Eli folded the letter back along its soft old creases and sat a while with it in his 2 hands. And Mercy Calloway looked at the broken man across the fire, holding the last words of the sister who had loved him, and understood that she was, against all sense, against every leash she had ever slipped, in love with the man the camp called the ghost of the high pass. The space between them on the cabin floor was about 4 feet. Mercy had spent her whole life measuring the distance between herself and other people, keeping it wide, because distance was safety and closeness was where they got their hands on you. She looked at the man on the far side of it, the size of the doorway, gentle as falling snow, holding the truest thing he owned, because she had asked him to, and for no other reason, expecting nothing back. She crossed the 4 feet. She did not say anything, because she had no words equal to it, and neither did he. And words had never been the language the 2 of them spoke. She sat down beside him, her shoulder against his arm, and felt him go still. That whole-body stillness she had learned meant something living was near him that he had not let near in years. And she stayed leaning into him until the stillness eased and his arm came around her, careful, like a man handling a thing that might break or might bolt. And they sat that way in the firelight a long time and did not say one word. It changed nothing on the surface and everything underneath. The days went on the same. The fire, the line, the mending, the rifle drill, the quiet. But the quiet had a new floor under it now. He would come in cold, and she would have his hands in hers, chafing the blood back into them before he could say a word. She would wake from the old dream, the dark, the grinding stone, the weight on her chest, and find him already awake across the room, his eyes on her, steady, and breathe out slow and sleep again. Neither of them said the word for it. They did not need it. They had a language older than the word, made of wood smoke and broth and a coat laid over a sleeping body in the cold, and they spoke it fluently all that long high country winter, while the bone whistle hung on its peg and the pass stayed shut, and down in the camp, a man with a ledger waited for the snow to ease enough to ride up and count the dead. They came up the mountain the first day the pass opened. Boone gave the warning a full 10 minutes before they came in sight, lifting off the hearth with a low sound in his chest and fixing on the door. Eli had time. He moved without hurry, which was its own kind of terrible to watch. A man who had done his fear years ago and had nothing left now but the work. He put Mercy behind the loose chimney stone with the second rifle and a clear line on the door, and pressed the bone whistle into her hand. If it goes bad out there, you don't wait, and you don't come out shooting into more guns than you can count. You go out the back wall where the chinking's loose, take the snowshoes and go north over the saddle. 2 days down, there's a flathead camp that'll take in a freezing woman. And if you ever get clear, you blow that whistle for somebody. You learn the rest of what I had to teach. Learn that one, too. He folded her hand shut over the worn bone. Ruth was right. Don't be the one nobody's left to call. Mercy looked down at the whistle in her fist, then up at him. No, she said. Mercy, no. Her voice did not shake. I have spent my whole life being put places by men who decided where I'd be. My brother sent for me. Doss decided I was a loose end. The mountain itself tried to decide it. I am done being a thing that gets moved to where somebody else thinks it's safest. She set the whistle on the stone ledge between them, picked up the second rifle instead, and her cracked hands were steady on it. You said it yourself. It's a house now, with a door. And the door's got somebody behind it. 2 somebodies. That's the part you keep leaving out of the arithmetic. And I shoot that marten hide 3 times running now. You taught me that on purpose. Don't you dare tell me it was so I could run. He looked at her a long moment, and whatever he saw in her face, he did not argue with it. He had spent his life learning when a thing was decided. Then, you stay low behind the stone, he said, and you don't show yourself till I can't hold it alone. They think you're dead. Dead's the only card you've got they don't know you're holding. Don't spend it till it takes the hand. And then he went out and stood in front of his own door, with the long gun cradled easy across his arm, and waited for them to ride up out of the trees, the way he had waited 11 years for nothing at all. There were 3 of them. Asahel Doss came up in the middle, well-fed and certain on a good horse, a soft-handed man in a town coat who had never been the one out front when the guns came out and did not intend to start. To one side rode a lean hired man named Quint, with a rifle across his saddle and a face like a closed door. To the other hung back the camp marshal, a heavy man with a tin star and a conscience he had sold so long ago he had forgotten the price, there to make whatever happened up here legal on the ride down. That's far enough, Eli said when they were 40 feet out. Doss reined in and made himself smile, the smooth, professional smile of a man who settled everything with paper. Easy, friend. We're not here for trouble. The lie came out smooth as poured fat. There was a slide on the pass before the snow. A whole wagon train lost, God rest them. I'm the land agent, affairs to settle for the dead, claims, next of kin to right. Sad business, but somebody's got to do it right. We're only here to count what the mountain took, so the records are square. You see anyone come up off that slide, friend? Anyone at all? No, Eli said. That a fact. It's the only fact you're getting off this mountain, Eli said. There's nobody up here but me. There's been nobody up here but me for 11 years. The pass'll close again by dark. I'd start down. But Doss had not built a district out of stolen ground by being careless, and his eyes had already gone past Eli to the second set of small tracks in the dooryard snow, to the thread of smoke too generous for one man's fire, and the smooth went out of his face and left the thing underneath it. Funny, he said softly. A man living alone 11 years keeps an awful big fire, and walks an awful small boot. He nodded once, and Quint's rifle started up off the saddle, and Doss said, in the bored voice of a man ordering a thing he has paid for many times, "She's the last of it, Quint. Settle the account." What happened next happened fast. the way these things do after they have been slow a long time. Quint's rifle came up. Eli was already moving, a big man who had spent 11 years being quicker than a cougar and a winter both, and he put his first shot through the meat of Quint's shoulder and spun him out of the saddle before the barrel ever cleared the horse's neck. But Doss, who never did his own killing, did the one reckless thing he had left in him, clawing a pistol out from under the town coat, and it barked, and Eli Brand took the ball high in the left side and staggered against his own doorframe. And the long gun's second shot went wide into the snow, and Doss steadied the little pistol on the big man's chest with his soft, shaking hand. And there was nothing at all between Eli Brand and the end of his 11 lonely years, but 6 feet of cold, bright mountain air. That was when the cabin door opened. Not the chimney stone, the door. Mercy Calloway stepped out of the doorway with the second rifle already at her shoulder, dead steady, her hands not shaking. And Asahel Doss turned at the sound of his whole tidy ledger coming undone, and saw, standing alive in the bright morning with a rifle leveled at his heart, the loose end he had brought half a mountain down to be rid of. The blood went out of his face. "You," he said, and the whole of his disbelief was in the word, because the dead were not supposed to keep accounts of their own. "You're under the—" And Mercy Calloway, who had been buried alive to balance a column in a stolen book, who had clawed up out of the stone saying no into the dark, shot the man who had murdered 9 people for a quarter section of bottomland before he could finish telling her where she was supposed to be. The clearing rang and went silent. Quint was down in the snow holding his shoulder and going nowhere. Doss was down and not moving at all. And the marshal sat his horse with his soft, empty hands held high, watching the woman they had all agreed was dead under a mountain stand over the body of the man who had given the order, the smoking rifle steady in her cracked hands, and learning a little late what the world costs a man who lets the mountain do his killing for him and takes it for granted that the buried stay quiet. Mercy did not look at him. She had already dropped the rifle and was across the clearing and on her knees in the snow beside Eli, both hands pressed hard to the dark spreading high on his left side, her voice gone ragged and fierce. "No," she was saying. "No, you don't. You don't get to do this. You kept the promise backwards 11 years, and you do not get to die the week you finally turned it right side up. Do you hear me? You live." And Eli, gray-faced, looked up at the woman holding his blood inside his body with her bare, ruined hands, and the corner of his mouth moved, and he said in a thread of the grinding voice, "Bossy." And she laughed, a terrible, cracked sob of a laugh, and pressed harder, and did not let him go. She did not let him go for 3 days. She got him inside, she and the marshal both, the soft man climbing down to help her without being asked, having decided in that ringing silence which side of his own life he wanted to live with. She packed the wound with the moss and yarrow Eli had named for her on better days, and she stood over the marshal while he loaded the dead and the wounded, and said the only thing she said to any of them: "You rode up here to help finish murdering me. You go down and tell it true, all of it, the slide and the claims and the names. Or I'll come down and tell it myself, and I'm the witness everybody in that camp already half believes." The marshal, white and shaking, said, "Yes, ma'am," and took Asahel Doss down across a saddle, and the camp had its story by nightfall. And for once it was near enough to the true one. The fever came on the second night, the way it does for any man with a hole in him, and Eli talked out of his head some, her name mostly and once, clear as a struck bell, 3 notes of a song with no tune, and Mercy sat over him both long nights and made him, by main force and spite, and a thing she finally had the word for, stay. On the 3rd morning the fever broke, and the clear weathered blue came back into his eyes and found her face hanging over his, and he said, "You're still here. like it was the most impossible of all impossible things, and she said, "Where would I go?" and meant it as the whole vow it was. Word of what had happened on the high pass came down slow and then all at once. The marshal told enough of the truth to keep his star by a thread, and a circuit judge who rode through in the spring, hearing how a land agent had brought a mountain down on 9 souls to keep ground he had stolen, found that a great many of Asahel Doss's tidy papers would not bear a careful man's reading. The claims he had built his ledger on came apart in the light, and Caleb Calloway's bottom land, patented clean in a dead man's name, with a living blood heir who had walked up out of the stone, came at last and uncontested to Mercy. She rode down to the land office once to put her name to it, then rode back up the mountain because the office was down there, and her home was up here, and she had learned the difference. She did not go back down to any of it for good. There was a road now, the pass was open, and with Doss gone there was a wide world below her and good bottom land of her own, where an engraver with steady hands could make a clean and ordinary life and never again be anyone's loose end. Eli, healing, watched her think it and made himself say it once, plainly, because he loved her and because his sister's letter had taught him the cost of letting someone learn to leave. There's a road now, and land of your own at the bottom of it. You don't owe this mountain a thing, and you don't owe me one. If you want the world down there, I'll see you safe to it. She walked to the peg by the hearth and took down the bone whistle, Ruth's whistle, worn amber and smooth, and turned it over in her hand a long moment, the notes that meant the light is going, and you have worked enough, and it is time to come home, held silent in the bone. Then she set it back in its worn place on the peg. She did not pack a thing. Ruth told you to find somebody to call in out of the dark with that, and to let somebody learn the notes, she said. She turned and looked at the man the camp had called the ghost, the man who had dug her out of a mountain with his bare hands and never once made the saving into a price. I learned the notes. I'm not leaving the only home either of us ever found just because the road's finally clear. I clawed up out of the stone saying no. I'm not going to walk back down it now saying yes to leaving. I'm staying. You'll have to get used to it. And Eli Brand, who had sworn for 11 years to live and die alone on this mountain, looked at her standing in front of his fire, telling him she would not go, and did not give a careful answer, and did not give a sideways one. All right, he said, rough and plain and full, and that was all. And it was a wedding vow in every way that ever mattered. They were not alone for long, which surprised them both. A mountain is a wide and lonely country, but it has always had its own scattered people, and they have a way of knowing one of their own. Hannah Pell came up the slope one June morning with a sack of flour and a wheel of cheese, a hard, kind widow who had buried 2 husbands of her own to the high country, set her load on the porch, looked Mercy up and down, and said only, "You're the one shot the land agent. Good. He had it owed. You eaten today." Old Renner, who had trapped the next mountain over 30 winters and was the only man Eli had ever called a peer, took to coming by with his pipe and a habit of fixing whatever was broken before anyone could tell him not to. The widow, Esther Vane, brought seed potatoes and a way of talking to Mercy woman, to woman that Mercy had not known she was starving for. They didn't come out of pity. They came because she had done a hard thing in a hard country and lived through it, which on a mountain is the only letter of introduction that ever mattered, each with a tool and a question and something warm to eat, until the woman who had been buried alive to settle a stranger's account became the quiet center of a small circle of people, who had each survived their own winters and knew her for one of their own. The cabin on the north shoulder got a second room that summer, raised by a man who worked slow and careful as his side healed, and a woman who worked beside him and would not be told to rest. And the camp slowly stopped calling the man on the mountain the ghost, because a man who comes down twice a season with his wife on his arm and a quiet word for everyone is just a neighbor. And the unkind names a place hands a lonely man have never survived the sight of him being loved. On the peg by the hearth there hangs a small whistle, carved from pale bone, worn amber and smooth with the handling of two hands, now instead of one, on a plaited rawhide cord. It is called one young woman in off an Ohio wheat field at dusk a lifetime ago, and it has hung silent through a war and a long dying, and 11 winters of a promise kept exactly backwards. And now, on autumn evenings when the light goes long and gold over the white peaks and Eli is late and off the trapline, Mercy Vane steps out onto the porch of the home they built and lifts it to her lips and blows the 3 notes Ruth carved it for. Low, high, low, and a quarter mile up the slope, a big iron-gray man straightens from his work and turns toward the sound of someone, at last, with a reason to call him home. The mountain takes what it takes, and it asks no one's leave, and it keeps no ledger and means nothing by any of it. But what you choose to dig out of the ruin it leaves behind, the one hand still moving in the dark, the one life you decide is not the mountains to keep, that part was never the mountains, and it was never any creditors to price. That part is the only thing in this whole hard country that was ever truly yours to save. So here is what I will leave you with, and I would truly like to know what you think. Eli Brand swore for 11 years that the safest thing a hurt person can do is climb up high and wall the whole world out and call the silence a home. And it took a woman dug out of a mountain and a letter from a sister who knew him better than he knew himself to show him the silence was only ever meant to be the place he healed, not the place he hid. So, tell me honest, when life has hurt you down to the bone, do you believe the wise thing is to wall everyone out where they can't reach you again? Or do you believe the way Ruth did, that the wall is the real danger, and the only thing that ever truly saves us is being brave enough to learn the notes and call somebody home? Tell me which one you have lived, down in the comments, because I read every last one. And so the lamp goes dim in the high cabin while the snow keeps falling. Stay warm, stay a while, and I'll see you up the pass next week.